Welcome to the latest video from the Watercolors Aquarium Gallery, brought to you from the Aquarium Rare Studios in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today we're going to unravel the myths of a CO2 system.
Ooh, scary.
They're really challenging, super complicated pieces of equipment that you really got to be careful. That's silly. They are so easy, they work really well, they're super effective. There's nothing scary about a CO2 system.
Yeah, I don't know too much about them generally myself because the only one I've set up is my own. That shows you how easily you can do them.
All right, so let's just start with what do you really need to set up a CO2 system? Mm-hmm. First obvious thing is a CO2 tank. And this, by the way, is going to be setting up a 5-pound tank CO2 system. This is the standard 5-pound CO2 tank. It does not need to be food grade CO2. We sell them here at the gallery. We refill them here at the gallery. You can also get them from any place that does CO2. Like I said, it does not have to be food grade CO2. Yeah,
there's no special aquarium CO2 either. It's all the same thing.
Same stuff. 5-pound tanks for the average hobbyist is probably all you're going to need. Mm-hmm. This is going to last somewhere between 6 months to a year, and then it'll have to be refilled. All CO2 tanks have a certain time limit where they have to be re-inspected. And I don't remember right.
I think it's every 2 years.
I think it's 5. So we need to figure out exactly what that time frame is with how often they need to be inspected. So if you go with a 20-pound CO2 tank, so you never run out of CO2, you may have so much CO2 in that system that it's going to need to be inspected every time you go to get an exchange, and that's expensive. If you do a CO2 tank exchange, you get a CO2 tank that's within spec every time. Even if yours is a year away from needing an inspection, swap them out, you're good for a long time.
Yeah, that's, to me, better than going to get it refilled yourself and then having to deal with remembering what needs to get done when, and just do the exchange and let us figure that out.
Yep. Now, if you do have a really fancy CO2 tank that you paid a whole bunch of money for, yes, you can still get them refilled at prices, and that does work. Okay, so there's your first step, the CO2 tank. 5-pound tank is the way to go. The regulator is the next one. This is the ISTA CO2 regulator. It's about $129.99. It does have a solenoid on it. What a solenoid means is it will automatically turn off and on with a timer. Or you just plug it into a wall and you don't worry about it. So there's definitely some debate out there as to whether or not you should run a CO2 system 24/7 or if you should only run it with the lights on. That's something we'll get into when we're going to go into detail about CO2. Right now, don't worry about it. We run ours 24/7. We just plug it into an outlet that opens up the solenoid and allows the flow of gas to happen. On a regulator for a CO2 system for an aquarium, one of the most important features is this right here. This is the needle valve. This is kind of like the little micro adjustment. If you go back to high school biology class when you were dissecting something and you had the macro focus and the micro focus, this is like the micro focus.
Yeah.
Right?
Trying to adjust CO2 levels with that valve is terrifying.
Definitely. Can cause problems.
Yeah.
Okay, so from there, the airline hooks up to this nozzle right here off of the needle valve. We use the Python stuff. Python does say this is CO2 safe. There is a difference between CO2 safe and non-CO2 safe. The non-CO2 safe stuff will slowly leach out CO2 through the hose and cause it to get brittle over time.
Yeah.
They tell us this is CO2 safe, we're gonna go with that. The next in line, very important piece of equipment is a check valve. Don't run your CO2 system without a check valve.
Yeah.
Speaking from personal experience, what happens if you run without a check valve is when that tank empties and there's no more pressure in the tank, back pressure from the aquarium will push water into your CO2 tank. It's really fun to sit there for about 25 minutes trying to shake all the water out of a CO2 tank.
Can you recover a tank if that happens? Like, how do you even...
That's where CO2 tank exchange comes in.
Yeah.
You just bring it back there and tell them, you might need to inspect this one.
That's so funny.
Yes. But if they're inspected, then they can be fine. So optional piece of equipment is this one's made by Seachem. This is called a U-tube. It's a simple blown glass little tube. We do have it on our system right here. Right. U-tube with a U. This just simply hooks on the tank and gets you a little easier swing into your system.
gives you some slack so that you can move around your diffuser wherever you need it to be without worrying about tangling anything up.
Exactly. Helps hold it in place, stuff like that. You can still do it like this, but then you run the risk of kinks, and it's just a little bigger. It's just not quite as neat, not quite as
Plus, it's
clean.
much more flush.
Yeah.
It is. Yes. It looks cooler.
Yeah, especially if you're going with a really cool aquarium where you want everything to be slim.
Exactly. Exactly. The very last piece of equipment is the CO2 diffuser. CChem makes some great ones. ADA makes some amazing ones. There's lots of really nice CO2 diffusers out there. A couple of different ways to do it. I like the in-tank ones because they look cool.
Yeah.
And I can look at it and I can see how much CO2 is going in the system. They do make some inline ones that just hook up right up to a canister filter. They're great. Nothing wrong with those. They work very, very well. Some would even say they're a little more efficient.
Yeah. It's hard for me to decide which is cooler.
I know. These just look cool.
Yeah,
so these
they
are the
are.
ones I use. So you can see it hooked up to our tank there. There's just a little suction cup, puts it in place. I like to put it where the output jet on the canister filter will blow across it. The more contact time the bubbles have with the aquarium water, the more CO2 gets dissolved into the system.
Yeah, it definitely seems like I've seen some tanks that are running a lot of CO2, and it just seems like it's all just escaping directly out of the top, and you're using way more than you need at that point.
Right. It's all about contact time at that point. How much time are the bubbles in contact with the water? How much time does the CO2 have to dissolve into the water? That's also why we use a diffuser. Smaller bubbles dissolve quicker than big bubbles. Big bubbles are more likely to make it all the way to the surface. If they make it to the surface, you're not accomplishing anything with your CO2. You're wasting that little bit of CO2. Some will get in.
And that will be a little bit, there's a pretty wide variety of price ranges for CO2 diffusers, and some of them diffuse more than others, so that's why they're priced more.
Exactly. So let's talk real quick about adjusting a CO2 tank. So Charles is going to be our little assistant here, and he's going to turn the needle valve up on the CO2 system, and you're going to see it push more CO2. Go ahead and just crank it, Charles. Kind of remember where it was, though. So you can see the CO2 coming out of that diffuser. That's coming out a little more than these fish are going to want to handle. All right, now drop it back down to where it was. Let me know when you're there.
Should be there.
All right, so if you'll notice, you did not see the amount of bubbles go back down. You saw them increase a little bit, but they didn't go back down. It takes time for the pressure in the regulator to catch up to what you're doing. Don't be afraid of that. Don't think you did something wrong. Keep an eye on it. In about 5 or 10 minutes, we'll take a look at this thing again, and we'll see exactly what the CO2 system is.
Yeah, those of us that are impatient, I think, have sort of skewed the perspective on how difficult it is to tune one of these things. Because if you're the type of person that's going to be like, oh, too much, too little, too much, too little, then you're going to have a really hard time. Take a step back, come back in 5 or 10 minutes. Even if you're blowing a lot of CO2 in there, you're not going to gas your fish in those 5 or 10 minutes.
Right. You must learn patience.
It's the hardest part of the hobby to learn.
It is, absolutely. So check out our videos coming up. We'll get into more detail about what CO2 does, how beneficial it is for aquarium, and how to get some of that fine tuning and adjustments happening in your aquarium. What do you think, guys? CO2 easy enough?
Yeah, I think so. I set up my tank fairly easily, and I have not had to touch it too much since, other than to clean out my diffuser from time to time. So once you get it there, and it doesn't take too long, you're usually in good shape.
It is. Yep. What do you think? You don't care. You don't care about plants.
No, I don't.
All right. Well, let's have lots of fun and keep those hands wet.